This is the Aware Families Podcast, the show that brings you a science-based, practical look at how to use the principles of functional medicine to keep your family healthy.
Welcome to our Aware Families Podcast. We are jumping into episode 6, which is going to be about our fifth pillar, community, connectedness, and purpose. I'm one of your hosts, Brittany Coburn, and I'm here today with my co-host, Tom Flass.
Welcome back, everybody. And it always confuses us as well. We unfortunately did not match the episode number to the pillar number.
Yeah.
But we have one more to go after this of the pillars, and then it will just be kind of whatever. It'll
right.
be slightly less confusing.
Yes, maybe a little more specific topic based, and we're going to have some guest speakers come and do some interviews. It should be pretty fun.
Yeah, but again, this is kind of laying the foundation
Yep.
of a lot of what we believe as functional medicine providers and kind of really true integrative medicine is to really look at all these pillars. And even though this one could be argued as maybe the most woo-woo out of the bunch,
Right.
it's really not.
No.
And science is backing that up, that, you know, this connection, community, and purpose, which is the subject of this pillar number 5, is vitally important to health. And, I think really sort of started even more coming to light after the whole COVID fiasco and the impact that had on physical and mental health.
Right. Yeah. We've really been able to research and see firsthand how humans are social creatures, right? And shocking. We're supposed to be surrounded by others and people that we see as our community.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you hit the nail on the head that researching this social isolation and all the impacts has been eye-opening.
Yeah. And even though we've come out of that with the whole social distancing thing and stuff like that, and we'll talk about this in a minute, we don't look like we've recovered to pre-pandemic levels
Right.
of a lot of the metrics and markers of kind of community and social health, I guess, if you will.
Right. Yeah. So you say the word community, right? And we kind of have a broad definition of what community is, because I think sometimes people think of community, oh, I live in this community.
Yep.
I'm from
neighborhood.
This is my neighborhood. But it can also be, more than just like a building or an organization. It's kind of, it's your tribe,
Yep.
right?
Online communities.
Gamer communities.
Yep.
I mean, it all counts.
Yep.
It's your sports community. Your people that you surround yourself with, that you trust, and you can be vulnerable and maybe be yourself.
So
right?
it's whatever sort of, I guess, fosters that feeling of connection.
Yeah.
Is, could be labeled as a community, whether that's sort of physical or virtual. I think there's obviously advantages to having more of a physical community as well,
Right.
but that's not to discount that there can be value from virtual communities as well. It's like, I guess the important thing is that feeling of connection
Right.
with other people.
Right. Yeah. And so I think part of when we start diving into some of the details here, just reinforcing that community doesn't necessarily mean just a town you live in or but it's bigger than that. And you can be part of many communities, and they can all bring a different sense of purpose for you.
But there's some underlying commonalities, right? That kind of feeling of support, the feeling of connection,
Safety.
Somebody's somehow got your back.
Yeah.
I don't know how that exactly works with some of the virtual type of things, but there's some kind of mental aspect of that, emotional aspect of it.
Yeah, even in like the online gaming, right? They've built a community out of that, and they do still feel that way. So I do think there are pieces of the community that go through, even if it's virtual.
For sure.
Yeah.
So why is it important? Is it so important that humans not be isolated and that they do have some sort of social connection?
Right. Well, I mean, it's kind of evolution, right? So we've evolved to be part of a pack or a tribe, really for survival, right? And so it took more than one person. That term, it takes a village. I think that brings a lot of deep meaning when you think about community.
The lone wolf might die, but the pack survives.
Right.
That kind of thing where, when we were, back in, tens, hundreds, thousands of years ago, it was like you really needed those people.
You did.
And it's for safety, for defense, for helping to hunt, for food production, everything, building shelter.
Raising
kids, the clothing,
right?
The whole thing.
Growing your home.
There was so much more interdependence for survival at that point where, it wasn't just clickety and somebody delivers your meal to you or, things. So I think we've substituted some things for other things, but that underlying need for that community and that connectedness has not gone away. And,
Right.
and I put on here our whole Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which, many people have heard of. And, we've gotten taught probably, I don't know how many times through different.
Especially in medicine,
yes,
right? Yeah.
Different coursework. But I mean, I think it's really an insightful thing. And it's kind of this pyramid. And the base one is always the physiologic, the actual tangible needs of shelter, water, food, safety.
Right.
And then the safety is actually sort of secondary to that. So basically, are you able to stay alive with enough food, enough water, shelter, and then the security and the safety piece of it. Again, before
layer.
when we went back 10,000 years, those were much more like you needed the tribe for those things. Depending, I mean, obviously safety is still an issue, but maybe the newer community type of things don't necessarily have to fill some of these needs, but that doesn't take away that we still need to have those connections. And because then we start getting into the higher parts of that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And then, there's the top sort of 3 parts of it, which are hugely reliant on that.
Right. Yeah. We start diving into the psychological needs, right? So that sense of belonging, the need to love, relationships, friends, intimate relationships, that sets that next layer up. And then, esteem, right? So feeling accomplished, having a little prestige. So understanding like that you are a part of something, but you're able to accomplish something. And then all the way up to the top of that pyramid, that self-fulfillment. So self-actualization, are you able to achieve your full potential? Right? Like what is the...
And if those base or the layers underneath that are not being met, then it makes it that much more challenging or impossible to kind of hit those higher levels of the hierarchy.
Yep. So we see that a lot in schools, right? With kiddos that are struggling. So if they're not getting food and water and sleep, they're not learning well. They're not. They don't have that sense of belonging.
If they don't feel
purpose,
safety,
then
that's going to just derail the whole thing.
Totally. Yep.
And so, these things have physiologic effects. So this isn't, again, just not just lip service, like, to be self-actualized, that it has an impact on somebody's actual physical health. And so we know that social isolation breeds ill health.
Right. Yeah. So not just mentally. That's the kicker, right?
Yep.
It's also physically.
Yes. But the mental health is not to be downplayed.
Oh, of course not.
And obviously our whole last episode, we dealt with stress and mental health as being such a huge issue. And that dovetails and ties in so directly with the stuff that we're talking about today, I think.
Right. Yeah. So we've found that people that have those strong social networks and that strong community, that strong sense of community, actually live longer, fuller lives.
Yep. The blue zones are not just about like, you're eating a lot of olive oil and vegetables, which are great. That might be part of it. But it really is that they think some of the core things are these people move their bodies and
together.
Are active and they're together. Yeah. There's a strong sense of community. And whether that's somewhere like Loma Linda in the U.S. or some of these other Okinawa, Japan, or where these other areas. Yep.
Right. Yeah. According to Psychology Today, they've done some research and published it showing that being part of a community has shown to reduce feelings of isolation, reduce feelings of loneliness, which again leads to a greater mental health or a more satisfaction with your mental health. The CDC has reports out there that individuals that feel that they're in a more supportive, social, connected world, they're going to live longer and healthier, right? So there's and it reduces chronic disease like heart disease, stroke,
diabetes,
Alzheimer's, right?
Yep.
And so, those are two major publishers that have put out a great deal of information about social isolation and loneliness.
And there's more funding, recently to actually study kind of the loneliness epidemic and the effects that that's having on physical and mental health. Because even if you just broke it down to a purely financial thing, I mean, that's that kind of lack of contact, the social isolation, the loneliness factor, it ends up costing the healthcare system a lot of money, as well as loss of productivity and just, loss of quality of life, increased risk of suicide, as we kind of talked about in the last episode. So all these things that have major impacts on, health-related quality of life.
Right. There, and we could even take this a little sideways and start looking at like social psychologist Dr. David McClellan from Harvard. He had done this study years ago, but and one of his big quotes was, "The people you habitually associate with determine as much as 95% of your success or failure in life." So it kind of reinforces that who you hang around, they're going to impact your future.
And the maladaptive part of that
Yep.
is that we've seen for decades is the gang mentality. You know,
Yep.
that they might not have that sense of community with their family or, you know, other parts of their peers or through their church or anything like that. But there's still, that doesn't take away that there's a need to belong and to have that need filled. And unfortunately, then in some cases that's sort of the most viable option is like joining a gang, which is, again, it's sort of filling that need, but then that, you know, it's also taking away the safety part of it and all that, and leads to a lot of badness and, and loss of life and things of that nature. So, you know, one book that I can't remember if you read or not, but I read a number of years ago that I thought was really a great book, and we'll also state it again, but it's a book called Tribe by Sebastian Junger. And it's all about that, like how, and he relates it because he was in bed with the military troops in the Middle East for a while, but also it's just kind of looking this sort of from an evolutionary perspective and how that need to belong and how some people are actually, ironically enough, happiest when there's something major going on, like there's a huge struggle or there's a war on or whatever, but you had your tribe, you had the people that you knew had your back. Yeah. And that people look back and like, oh, yeah, when I was deployed or whatever, they were actually happier in a lot of ways. And so just the lessons sort of learned from that sort of seems like opposite. Or they also talk about in World War II, you know, when London was getting bombed, and some people were like, oh, they look back fondly on those days because the whole community really came together on that. And like, that's so interesting.
Yeah. Well, and I guess you could say that in some ways with the whole COVID pandemic, right? Because people would bond together in some ways for like, how hard is this? What are we all going through? You know,
except that we're being forced to isolate.
The isolation piece is tough, but still, you know, I still think there was that mentality of like, we're not alone. We're going through it together in a, you know, virtual experience.
Yeah.
But anyway, so what does social isolation do to humans? Like, what are some of the actual physical impacts that we see? Because we have a lot of studies on this.
So, you know, overall, we talked about that there's impacts sort of from a 10,000 foot view that social isolation, loneliness increases what's called all-cause mortality, so risk of dying from any cause. And there's an article from a very reputable journal called PNAS in 2013 that looked at that, and they were looking at one of their kind of take-home points was socially isolated individuals are increased risk for development of cardiovascular disease, infectious illness, cognitive decline, and all-cause mortality. And then as far as measurements that they actually could measure in the blood or in the physical exam, that social isolation associated with increased blood pressure, an inflammatory marker called C-reactive protein and fibrinogen, and other heightened inflammatory and metabolic responses to stress. So it really takes away that resilience piece, and then you can actually measure sort of physical markers of inflammation and other kind of adverse health effects.
Right. And just for people's information, you know, C-reactive protein, fibrinogen, elevated blood pressure, we see those, you know, elevate in chronic stress situations. We see them higher in autoimmune conditions and in major inflammatory conditions. So we follow those, and the fact that we can relate those back to social isolation is a little terrifying.
Yeah. I mean, because you can be looking at all these other pieces. If you know somebody's eating pretty well, sleeping pretty well, whatever, but they have that piece. Yeah. Again, that's why the pillars we call them the pillars, you know, because you can't necessarily make up for one pillar that's crumbling by trying to shore up a couple other ones when there's a couple big areas of gap there. So it's, again, I think it's more than just lip service.
Right. Yeah. We really do need to rely on all the pillars, and, you know, you might focus more on one at one time, but again, all six matter.
Yep. And so as far as the numbers are, you know, sort of how prevalent is the problem, there's some information from, I think this is through the CDC, but some fairly recent polling, general population, about 33%, so a third of adults age, and this is 50 to 80, so kind of older adults, reported feeling a lack of companionship. Some of the time or often in 2024, which was a little bit better than during the pandemic, but still higher than pre-pandemic levels. Right.
Yeah. And so we're not at baseline yet.
No.
And we're 5 years out.
Yeah.
And we're still recovering from the social isolation. I am struggling to say that term today.
Yep.
And loneliness aspect affiliated with
Definitely.
this.
And same, when they really drill down on the social isolation part of it, 29% of adults 50 to 80 reported experiencing social isolation. Some of the time or often, which also kind of is sort of returning closer to pre-pandemic levels, but not all the way back to baseline there.
Right.
And then what about kids?
Yeah. So kiddos, 1 in 3 kiddos aged 13 to 17 report feeling lonely or isolated at least some of the time in 2024. It seems to increase with age. So older children and teenagers have reported higher levels of loneliness compared to younger kiddos.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
I
think, because things in junior high and high school can get tough,
Yeah. Yep. I agree there. So children experiencing loneliness and isolation are more likely to develop mental health conditions like anxiety, depression, and different behavioral disorders. And we can see that. And when we start seeing kiddos that are struggling with those disorders, we, backtrack a little and to kind of figure out how did we get here, what's going on. And, there's the isolation piece that's there.
You got to look at all the parts of it.
Yeah.
So kind of tied right in with this is purpose.
Yeah.
And which, again, this sort of is on one hand maybe a little more esoteric, but I think it's a powerful point, and actually in some ways can be as or maybe more important than some of the other ones, because if somebody has a strong sense of purpose, that can actually make it, so that they don't experience as many of the negative health effects of maybe not having a big community or maybe being a little more social isolated if that sense of purpose is there.
Right.
So why don't you talk us through what does that mean?
Right. Yeah. So what is your purpose in life? Like what is that? Having a central organized life direction or goal, and kind of a belief that your activities are valuable and important, that you are making a difference or a positive impact in the world in some way, shape, or form, right? We have a lot of research out there that shows having a purpose is good for your mental health. A sense of purpose, a sense of having a greater purpose in life has been significantly associated with lower levels of depression and anxiety.
Which is also how some people parlay a horrible experience into, sort of improved mental health and improved outcomes down the line. Is like, this horrible thing happened to me, but if I can help prevent this from happening, or if I can help other people who went through this to come to terms with it, and that could run the gamut of awful things, losing a child or something, really
one of those just horrific,
devastating type of things, that if that supplies a sense of purpose, that is hugely important. And so the kind of key findings with some of the research as far as the sense of purpose linked to better mental health, lower depression, anxiety, better physical health, again, the longevity, increased lifespan, and lower risk of all-cause mortality and early death. So that's cardiovascular disease and a whole bunch of other conditions as well. Overall, just well-being, life satisfaction. Because that's sort of, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If you have purpose, you're going to want to take care of yourself so that you can
continue your purpose.
And find ways to better yourself and sort of support that purpose. And purpose, I think all these things, especially, I think the common factor with a lot of these is resiliency.
I was just going to say, when you have an increased purpose, your resiliency probably goes up, right? And so there's some meta-analysis, a lot of research out there showing that people with a greater purpose in life experienced or felt like they experienced less stress. So they have an increased resiliency. We talked a lot about resiliency with our last episode too, when we were talking about mental health and ACE scores particularly. But the resiliency associated with the reduction in perceived stress, right, is there. The other thing we were talking about is, you sometimes you retire from a job, and then there might be a period of time where you're wondering, okay, what is my purpose? What is it that I'm supposed to be doing? And, we often see people who find something, right, that's worth their time and energy, they start doing better again. Because
otherwise you're sort of drifting. And when you look at in our young adults.
Mm-hmm.
So this was I think this came out from the National Institutes of Mental Health, but they kind of looked at this, and they found that young adults age 18 to 25 in the U.S., twice the rates of anxiety and depression, even as teens, largely related to they felt a lack of meaning, purpose, and direction. And that was directly associated with that poor mental health. And that more than half of these young adults reported that they lacked a meaning or purpose in their lives. And it's hard. I mean, it's, when you're in that stage of your life too, and you're kind of drifting and trying to find your way.
Yeah.
But sort of recognizing that search for meaning in and of itself can be the part of the meaning.
I was just going to say that can bring purpose, right?
Yeah.
That can bring purpose on in its own. For sure.
So that obstacle is the way, Ryan Holiday, this kind of stoic mentality.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So what can we do about it? Like, how do we foster community connection and purpose? How do you cultivate purpose?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of, and it's sort of, I think, somewhat age dependent. But knowing that it's like everything in life, it's a journey, not a destination.
Journey. Right. It's all about every single step, not just the outcome.
And so there was a recent, Harvard Health Letter, they come out with these periodicals, and they every, I don't know if it's monthly or whatever, but they did one on sort of 10 ways to find your purpose in life. And I thought this was kind of interesting. It's just sort of food for thought.
Yeah.
And so they list, one is zero in on your strengths. What do I have to offer the world? What can I parlay? And that could be any number of things. It doesn't have to be a physical or a mental, some skill you have, some experience you had, anything like that. So that could be viewed as a strength. And then sort of the obstacles, the way part of it. Think about the obstacles you've overcome in your life. Could I parlay that into helping somebody else, achieve their goals and get past something that I got past? Drawing up a purpose timeline, sort of thinking about how things evolved over time and where is this leading me or where is this taking me? Is it
like a business template almost, right? Drawing up, what possible actions can come with this. Yeah.
Positive role models, always huge.
Yeah.
Things that, I guess sort of vice versa with that, becoming a mentor, and also could you end up being a role model for somebody else? Right.
Big brothers, big sisters, there's so many ways to get involved with younger people. But even if you're a teenager, like you're older than other people, you can still be a mentor.
And I don't think you realize how much the younger kids look up to you.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Until you're really like a parent and you're kind of got the third person perspective watching it.
I just have to tell this story because it kind of relates. So my youngest plays soccer and has this community of soccer kids, right? They just love it. But when they're really young, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8, probably even, when the high schoolers have their big games like homecoming and senior night, they will invite the younger kids to escort them out on the field. And I was taking photos of the event one time, and then looking back at them, and you should just see the looks on the faces of the younger kids as they're looking up at this big soccer player that they're escorting out on the field, and the older kids are just amazing about it, and they're so great. But it changes the younger kids.
Yeah.
It really does.
And I think really emphasizing that for the older, that you lead by example, and that you are a role model, and that this is an important thing, but how cool for you, like you can really impact and it has levels, right? Because then that high school kid, if he met like a professional soccer player or whatever, that's the same type of thing.
It totally is. It totally is. Yep. And it's not alone to soccer, right? This is all things.
It's a great power, great responsibility, but it can literally change somebody's life.
Yep.
Thinking about what the world needs, which is obviously a lot right now, but sort of looking at that and how can I play my part in it. And I don't know if you've read this book, the Viktor Frankl, The Man's Search for Meaning.
No, I haven't read that one.
So he was a guy that survived the Holocaust. He was in a concentration camp for, I can't remember how many years, unfortunately lost like pretty much everybody in his family. So you think like the worst thing that could possibly happen.
Right.
And he was a psychiatrist before this, and he basically came up with this after being liberated and coming out of this, and came up with this logotherapy. And logos, it really was all about It's based on three fundamental beliefs that, humans have free will, you're free to choose your attitudes and actions, responsible for your choices. But their main motivation for living is the will to find meaning. And so they thought that could be found through, creativity, through experiences, attitudes. But even in the most miserable, biggest take home, even in something like surviving a concentration camp, that he found he attributes the reason he survived is to finding meaning and purpose. Like, if I get out, I can use everything I experience and help other people through this experience. And he really attributes to that element of his survival, like literally the reason he lived through it, because other people who didn't have hope and didn't find any meaning in it didn't make it. Yeah. So it's pretty powerful. I mean, it's one of these books that you hear referred to again and again, but it's a good.
Have to grab that. It reminds me a lot of like Dr. Gabor Mate. I can't ever say it right. And his story, because he talks a lot about that too. Obviously not the same piece, but with the concentration camp. But same thing, overcoming and having that like will, that drive, that purpose. Yep. Yeah.
And it's not always easy, but again, I think just sort of putting that seed in there, and that this is something that even adults, that we're, still looking to find our way, and sometimes, nobody's necessarily got the ultimate answer or whatever, but that,
including us.
Yeah.
We're just here plugging away every day.
And for people that aren't hugely social with other humans, I think this is a role where animals and pets can also play a part.
There's a lot of research out there. There's a lot of research out there on the connection between pets and humans and the purpose, right? And adding to your purpose, whether that be your own or volunteering in other areas.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's, you can be volunteering at the local shelter. You can walk dogs. There's just so many things. Go to the zoo, visit, you know what I mean? I mean, there's just ways that you can interact with animals that increase your purpose as well.
And then they are reliant on you, and they connect with you. I mean, it's obviously those of us who are dog lovers and have dogs. I mean, it's legit.
I know. I was talking about, I love dogs, but I love cats also. We have 3 cats. And I was talking about...
We have a cat who thinks he's a dog, but that's a whole nother story.
There you go. I was talking about my cats with my students yesterday about it, and it was funny. You can just tell because you get kind of excited when you start talking, right? And the oxytocin increases, and you're happy, and you kind of glow when you talk about things that you love and care about.
Yeah, but, so just, I guess, to summarize, some other ways of building community and connectedness.
Right, yeah. Finding a way to be of service to others, right? Like, how can you be helpful to somebody besides just yourself? And maybe just your like job duties, but actually like be of service.
Or as a student or whatever, So again, I think this kind of goes across the age gap there. So, and I think there are multiple ways to do this, I think through a church or other volunteer organizations. But, through the school, there can be different opportunities, community centers,
sports teams,
just extended family, being of service if you have extended family members who need help, older grandparents or things of that nature. And I like the idea of kind of combining things, and you talk about this all the time, kind of combining the connection and community piece of it, but also one or several of the other pillars, like, going for nature hikes and walks and other things like that, group exercise classes, yoga classes, that really, so then you're sort of getting
together.
You could get an outside piece, an exercise piece, and a connectedness community piece. So I think that's kind of like a potential win-win-win.
Right. Yeah. Combine all aspects of health into one. Yeah. I mean, you think about like holidays, right? And so we eat together, we gather together, we create big meals together. So we're doing all of these things kind of as a team or a community.
And we lie on the couch together after eating a turkey and stuffing.
And watch whatever,
So interestingly, I came across this where there's a recent study showing, and they use an app-based mindfulness activity daily. So this is people that were doing this on their own. So it wasn't like in a group, wasn't a group meditation class, but they did it for several weeks. And just that mindfulness and kind of getting their brain in that zone, increase their feelings of connection and decrease their feelings of isolation. And then when they did engage with people, they were more present and more connected. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a skill building thing or something. It kind of set them up to open themselves to be more able to be connected, sort of changing some of those pathways. And that's something that so they didn't even have to be present in a group, but it helped them later on to feel more connected. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, that is. It kind of makes you wonder too, once you volunteer in one area, doesn't it seem like you're more prone to then volunteer in other areas? I don't have any research to back that up, but it seems like those people that are involved in things, maybe with their kids' school, are also involved with things, outside of their work and with their friends and things that they find true and find meaning in. So you volunteer a little bit, and pretty soon you volunteer a lot.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And one of the last things, we were talking about this before we went live, and since we both have kids, and chores. Which the kids would consider a 4-letter word,
right?
But there's actually some interesting stuff on how chores can fill a couple of those buckets, because the family is their sort of primary part of their community and their connection,
right?
As well as like the sense of purpose. So. It shouldn't be viewed as like, oh, this is a burden on my children. I think children who have no chores and no responsibilities, it's detrimental.
Right. Because it can actually help build your self-esteem, build your confidence. And you can start with little things at young ages, right? Unloading the dishwasher, loading the dishwasher.
Feeding the pets.
Yep. Taking out the trash. And, all of these things that we teach each other or teach our little people in our homes to do, but pretty soon they can also seek satisfaction in some of that.
And you have to, as your part as the parent, praise and acknowledge that the effort that they're doing and that it's contributing to the family,
right?
But knowing that it's fostering that responsibility and that sense of connection, responsibility, social skills, other things like that. So it's not just like check the box, get this stuff done, because there's that part of it, obviously, but knowing that there is a bigger purpose behind that, and kind of couching it in that framework, I think can be beneficial as well.
Right. And one of the other studies that you had pulled up, where it was talking about how chores can help promote emotional regulation, right? So you can like delay that sense of gratification until after something is complete, versus, hey, give me $5 and I'll go do this. Yeah. But actually,
the sense of earned something, whatever it is, privilege or monetary.
Right. Exactly.
Compensation.
Which changes as kiddos get older.
Yes,
I think mine are in a different state.
Yes, because their financial wants are also kind of grow exponentially as well. So
yeah, for sure.
So just resources overall. And do you have anything that, any stuff that you would add as far as, there's a couple websites that we'll mention, but I didn't know if there's any other books or things that you thought that did a good job kind of touching on this.
Not really. Not that we haven't already kind of spoken about.
And again, the two we did talk about was Tribe by Sebastian Junger and Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl are two really good books and worthwhile.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, BetterHelp, which is the online, it's a mental health service, where you can get counseling via secure platform, sort of remotely.
Right.
They actually have some stuff on their website, at betterhelp.com, and they have a whole advice thing on how to build a community, strategies for fostering inclusion and support. So if you got on their website and looked under how to build a community, there's actually some really interesting stuff that I saw in there. I thought it was a good resource.
Yeah.
And then there's another website I came across when researching this. It was called allforkids.org.
Okay.
And again, there was a kind of a blog about community service for families and some recommendations and things like that, volunteering together for, again, good on multiple levels.
Right.
And I thought that was pretty interesting as well.
Yeah, for sure. Overall, I think we were able to cover quite a bit about community connectedness and purpose today.
Yeah. So this pretty much wraps up episode 6 and pillar 5. And then again, next episode, we're going to cover pillar number 6, which is nature, sunlight, and environment, which we will also touch on things like toxic exposures and providing a clean environment, not just being outside in nature and that environment, which is also important. So we're going to touch on all those things. So again, thanks for listening, and please leave us a comment. And if you like the podcast, please share it with your friends, your family, anybody you think could benefit from the information. And again, this is signing off on this episode of the Aware Families podcast, and we will see you again for the next episode.
Yep. Thanks. Have a great day.